Thank you, Jane, for a wonderful talk. Um, let's see, what's his name? The great philosopher Immanuel Kant. He had this, I don't know German, something like dich an sich, which means thing in itself. So thank you very much for your Kantian talk. Are there any questions?
I have a question.
Sure.
Uh, Kind of strange question. Uh, so when you become a Zen master, you kind of and you don't really have anyone to go to for questions. So what do you do if you have a question yourself?
We go to each other. Yeah. So teachers still work on kongans with each other. And we certainly talk informally as teachers. And there are these formal teacher groups like the Quantum School of Zen. Everyone with Inca or transmission is in a group together. And then there are these inter community groups like the American Zen Teachers Association, the Lay Zen Teachers Association, the Soto Zen Buddhist Association. Then there are these sort of um, pan Buddhist groups, which I'm not a part of, so I don't know any of their names. But yeah, people need to look at each other and help each other, and nobody's ever finished. If you think you're finished, then you haven't even started. So no one's ever finished. That's really important. And Zen Master Sung San, the way he, we talk about Dharma combat, and Dharma combat, it's sort of like Kongan practice, but is also like not necessarily a right answer, a person looking for a right answer. Like during Inca ceremonies, Diane had an Inca ceremony, Dennis had an Inca ceremony. Inca ceremonies, we have this Dharma combat, and you think Dharma combat, that's like violent, or but someone asked Zen Master Sung San, what is Dharma combat? So Dharma combat is somebody challenges and then someone responds, and said, why Dharma combat? And he said, oh, that's to help each other. That's to keep the mind sword sharp. So if you don't have anyone challenging you, then your mind sword gets very dull. You think you know everything. But so it's yeah, we all need each other. Absolutely. Yeah. So thank you for your question. Yeah. Are there any other questions?
I have a question.
Yeah, hi Majik.
Um, and the question is about something that Jane talked about in her talk.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it's not a theoretical one. It refers to my dilemma, and maybe somebody else has this dilemma as well. So when we practice, we we have this ideal of thing itself. Um, but how do we really, or how should we really use it in our practice? And the reason I'm asking is that very often, and I know that it's not just me, the understanding is that when thoughts appear, it becomes like a mental whack-a-mole where thoughts appear and you have to bang them because they're not the thing itself. So you have to squash thoughts as they appear so as to get access to something that is under the thoughts. But then it doesn't, in my experience at least, it doesn't lead far, this kind of practice of trying to stop thoughts appear because they're not the thing itself. So what is how should it sounds abstract, but it's not to me and maybe to other people as well. How should we treat it? Is the thing itself the thought as well, or are they not part of the yeah, what do we do? Thank you.
So that's a wonderful question, and I'll have to be careful not to talk until like for 2 hours on that question. It's a really wonderful question. So there's several. several approaches to that. First of all, it's not getting rid of thinking, it's using your thinking. So I have this watch, and I have it stuck under my computer so I can see what time it is, keep track, because it's too abstract to look up there. It's easier to look here. And I look at this watch, and it tells me that it's 1:17. And that's what the watch is telling me. But that's just that. It's just what the watch is telling me. And how do I use that? Well, it tells me that I have more time to talk and so on and so forth. It tells me Jane could have talked another 5 or 10 minutes and that would have been fine. You know, it tells me these things, but it's not running my life. I can use it without getting glued to it, without being attached to it in a way that I can't separate. So as far as thinking goes, the question is, how do you use it? Not whack-a-mole, whack-a-mole, whack-a-mole. Of course you're going to think. That's what your brain does. Your brain invents thoughts. You know, in the heart sutra, we talk about the 6 senses: eyes, ears, body, eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind. And what is the mind? As a perceiving object, it perceives thoughts. That's what it does. But they're just thoughts, you know? Like Jane said, they're not the thing itself. They're just our thinking. And so we can use it. We don't have to suppress it. We don't have to fall for it. We don't have to believe our thinking. Just, oh, this is useful, you know? Or maybe this is not useful. So that's that aspect. But then there's this notion of the thing itself. And, you know, language doesn't work. Language really basically does not work. There's the real world and the language world, and they don't quite meet. And we think the language world is the real world. And then we manipulate the language world, and we think that's how to manipulate the real world. So when we say the thing itself, then we have this notion of thing. And there's no other way to say it. I mean, everything Jane said was wonderful. Everything that Zen Master Bon Hae, that Jeff Kitsis said was wonderful. This is all really wonderful and good teaching, and it's pointing us in a very helpful direction. But the minute you say thing, you have a problem. Because then you have this thing that is separate from you. You have I over here and thing over there. You have the event and you have your experience of the event. And these are separate. And then you go around saying, what was the event? What was the event? Then you try to pin it down. And how do you try to pin it down? You try to pin it down with words. And then you end up like the Senate of the United States, where you have a whole bunch of people saying this is what happened and a whole bunch of people saying, no, that's what happened. And they're doing what their words, you know, they're just working in the word world. And nobody really remembers what it was like. Because immediately the words come up, and the minute the words come up, it's not the real thing anymore. But we have to use those, right? You know, they have to decide, should Trump be impeached? They have to make that decision. So they have to use the words. They have to make the arguments. They have to do it to the best of their ability. And we can all have our opinions on who is or who is not being honest, but, you know, let's give everyone the benefit of the doubt, which is sometimes hard to do. But yeah, so you have to operate in this world. But what actually happens in the moment, whether it's something as dramatic as a crowd of people, you know, having an insurrection in the middle of Congress, whether it's something as dramatic as that, or whether it's something as simple as looking at your watch. The actual thing can never be captured by words. So this thing itself, already by putting it in that thing itself, already there's a problem. Nouns are problems, verbs are problems, adjectives are problems. All these things serve to separate. So there's this poem, and everyone here who's familiar with me is sick of me saying it, but it's so wonderful. It's from the Mumen Kwan. It's the case where someone asked Zen Master Joju, why did Bodhidharma come to China? And Joju says, the cypress tree in the front garden. And the poem is, words cannot speak truth, speech cannot point into nature. One who holds words is dead. One who attaches to sentences is lost. So if we try to capture what Jane is calling the thing itself, what Zen Master Bon Hae was calling the thing itself, if we try to capture that with words, we've already lost. We have to cut through that. And I don't even want to say our experience then, because our experience already we have a construct. But this don't know mind. This don't know mind means cut through thinking, cut through speech. Touch what's real. Touch it. Before speech, before thinking, touch it. That's what that means. And then the more our minds are open, the more we're not fooled by our thinking. The more we can see, oh, that's our thinking, and use it, but not get stuck in it, not get sort of kidnapped by it. The more our minds are open, this don't know mind, then our actions are a response to what's really going on. Jane had this wonderful example, or maybe it was Jeff who had this wonderful example. Jane's quoting, I don't remember, of the players on the basketball court. Basketball is a really fast game. You can't think fast enough in basketball to analyze everything and ahead of time. And, in the moment, you have to act. You just have to do it, just completely do it. And that's what they're talking about. This just do it mind, where you're not, okay, this ball is coming at me and its trajectory is such and such. And if I put my hands, it doesn't go like that. You don't stand, with people trying to block you as you're trying to make your shot. You don't stand there and say, okay, if I do this angle, you don't use calculus to play basketball. You just practice and practice and practice and practice, and then whatever the situation, you just respond in that moment. And, if you're LeBron James, you do really well. And if you're me, it's like, what, this is a ball? What am I supposed to do with it, So that's our lives. We have to live our lives that way, just completely alive, no preconceptions. And it's impossible, right? We always have preconceptions, but as much as we can, completely alive. This giant don't know. Just like that. Okay? So thank you for your question.
Okay.
Are there any questions?
I have a question.
Okay.
So at the beginning, and I'm sorry, I can't remember what it was called. We went through the different senses, and we, talked about, and I can't remember which one this fell with under this. This was the first time I had seen that, but it was about opinion. And so I was thinking about how, thinking about something leads to an opinion, and it's kind of a reaction to the thing. And so, if we can't really know what's happening, then we can't really have an opinion about it. But sometimes, if we're talking about social justice issues or something, sometimes it's good to speak out about something. So how can we, within that framework, think about how to react appropriately for these types of matters?
Thank you. So if it's an opinion, then it's not appropriate. But if it's appropriate, then it's not an opinion. Okay? You as we say in Yiddish, versteh? Understand? So what that means is, suppose, okay, I'm Jewish, all right? And suppose I'm with a group of people and they don't know I'm Jewish. And suppose somebody says something anti-Semitic. It's not an opinion for me to say, do you know you're talking about me? That's not an opinion. That's just what it is. So correct action in the moment is not an opinion. It's just like in the basketball game, it's a response. Something happened, you respond to that. And it's not a question of, I mean, it's important to keep our direction. So social justice issues, so it's important to recognize everyone is human, everyone has dignity, everyone needs to be treated with dignity. It's important to recognize these are ways that these kinds of people are not treated with dignity. That's very important. It's important to see, yes, um, there are certain statistics about police officers and police violence, which means that if your skin is dark in this country, then you can expect to be treated differently, and you have to be more, um, what's the word, more fearful, more alert, more something. You have to recognize this could happen to you, whereas somebody who looks like me, probably it's not going to happen to them. Yeah, absolutely. You have to be aware of these things, but that's not an opinion. That's just fact, you know? And then the question is, how do you act in the moment? If you act out of your opinion, and that means that there's this kind of disconnect, it's like the event happens and you go click, 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 okay, this is what I should do, then you've lost. It has to be so absorbed, so completely yours that you don't have to calculate what you're going to do. You just simply do that. You see injustice being done. You know when you can speak out. You know how to speak out. You know that sometimes it doesn't help to speak out because it just makes the person defensive and makes them even more that way. You have to learn how to speak out to be effective. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. So, you know, the realization that we are not separate, that is the realization that lies behind all social justice. This realization that we truly not need to love each other, but that we're not separate. So how can we not love each other, even when we get pissed off at each other, just like you get pissed off at yourself, right? So this is a very deep, deep thing. And it's this open mind that allows us to be effective. And sometimes we're not, and then we learn from that. Okay? Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions?
I have a question. It's kind of a follow-up from
Sure.
what you were just saying. But
Mhm.
like you have some situations you'd say that, it's a fact. And yet you can always find a group who says that no, it's not a fact, or they disagree and say that's not the fact. I mean, there's a group that believe that a group of men that believe that women are biblically supposed to serve men.
Mhm.
And so they would point to something else and say, no, you're wrong because this is the fact. um you know what I mean? So
Mhm.
I still have, I mean, not, I mean, I understand what you said and I followed it, but there always seems to be uh some opinion or somebody else who, like what I've heard from some, if you have quotas and so many African Americans, then it's, oh well, now the white guy is
Mhm.
discriminated against
Mhm.
because then they don't have that opportunity just because of their skin. And so it just really baffles me on that they're just fake news. I mean, that's what fake news is. Somebody else believes
Mhm.
something and sees it in a different way, because we all have different experiences. Um, so it it just confuses me, I guess, that there seems to be that there is a right and a wrong. You there are certain things. You shouldn't judge a person by their skin or their religion, but there's always some group that does and seems justified from it, and they would say that no, they have the justification. So I don't know. It's just confusing, I guess.
It's hard to be, I said this last Sunday to somebody, it's hard to be human. It is hard to be human. Everything you talked about as fact is actually second order fact. It's not really a fact. So you talked about men who believe that women should be subordinate to men. The fact is, what are women actually doing? What are men actually doing? What is this woman doing? What is that man doing? In the aggregate, what are the statistics about women with jobs and so on and so forth? What are the statistics with men with jobs and so on? What about sexual assault? The facts are on that level, what actually happens. The opinions are the interpretations that we give about them, like women should be subordinate to men, women should not be subordinate to men. That's a second level of things. Sort of what's that word? Meta? META, not METTA, not compassion, but, sort of META. That's a second level. The actual fact is the ball is coming at, is coming at you in the basketball court. What are you going to do with it? That's the fact. The ball is coming at you. So we tend not to operate on that level of fact. We tend to, just as you did, but this is what we all do, we take the facts or these things on the second level, and they're not. And we often lose our intimacy with the actual facts. A lot of Kangan work has to do with being really intimate with the actual fact, because we're so used to having our opinions about them. And we have these stories like a monk asked Joji, does a dog have Buddha nature? And Joji said mu, which means no or has not. And you ask the student, does a dog have Buddha nature? And all these ideas about Buddha nature and dogs and all these things come up. And to be really intimate with that, to cut through all those opinions and just be really intimate. That's a lot of Kangan work is teaching us how to do that. And it's really hard because we're trained not to do that. We're trained to operate on this other level. And on this other level, people clash all the time. Sure. Because it's our interpretation of things, it's our opinions about things. We can't, it's really hard. In some way, we never can see things as they are because we're limited by our senses. We can't see in the ultraviolet. Insects can see in the ultraviolet. An insect sees a flower, sees something very different than I see because it sees in the ultraviolet and I don't. So in some sense, of course, we don't see things as they actually are, whatever that means. But as much as possible to have this intimacy. People talk about Zen being intimate, and people think of it as this like spiritual, the spiritual, and I don't know what, but it just means, just that ball is coming at you and you see it. It's a basketball and it's coming at you and you got to do something. That's the intimacy in that moment, just grabbing that ball and passing it to somebody, or trying to shoot the basket. That's that intimacy in that moment. So we're always going to disagree on these second order things, and then there's the third order things, right? You have the second order, and then you have the analysis and the opinions about that, and that makes like a third order of things. like people on the left are always kind of arguing with each other. It's kind of amazing. I remember when I was in graduate school, like 1,000 years ago, and there were I guess it was like the Trotskyites and the Maoists. I don't know. They were like different sort of really, really far left of even communism groups, in Berkeley. And I'd sit in a coffee shop and I'd listen to them talk about each other. And it was like, it was just like these crazy put downs about how this particular group was like not, I don't know, not right thinking or left thinking, not thinking correctly. And, they were just awful and you had to do away with them. And the other group would come in and they'd say the same thing. And it was like, people do this. We just do this all the time. And then you can just take it level after level after level and you just start doing this. And that's that intimacy. We just lose track of it. We don't even know what it is anymore. We're so used to operating on this other level. Just the ball is coming at you. What are you going to do? Thank you. That was a great metaphor, Jane. I really like it. So, yeah. So, living our lives where we actually see what's in front of us and not what we think is in front of us or we're afraid of is in front of us or we want to be in front of us or we don't want to be in front of us. What is actually in front of us? It's really hard. It's really hard because we're so trained not to do that. So our practice, and especially Kangen practice, is really learning not to get fooled. It's learning that intimacy, which is not something special and spiritual and it feels so good. It's just the ball is coming towards you, What are you going to do? You have to do something in that moment. So does that help at all?
Yes, very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question.
Sure.
I get okay. I confuse myself. A lot of the examples are, like a ball coming at you, or you've had the example of, your child runs out in the street,
Mm-hmm.
and you pull the child. You don't think about what you're going to do first. You just do it. And these seem like such concrete examples, how to,
Mm-hmm.
if the ball's coming at you, you get hit with it or you bat it away. There's an action that has to occur. But what about, I get confused, what about like things that aren't that concrete, like, I guess it's all action, isn't it? I mean, it's all action that you take in any given moment based on, and I guess this is where I get confused, based on, to me, it's what your previous experience, what you know, where you've been, who you are,
Mm-hmm.
and all of that. That would, to me, be your karma, I guess, is going to affect
Mm-hmm.
your action, which explains, I guess, to me, the people who think, raiding the Capitol is okay, or demeaning women is okay, or demeaning other people, or people who don't do those things is okay. It's how do you, I guess maybe Liz kind of got me wondering about that too, is I understand a ball coming at you, but I don't know what you do when it's, cypress tree in the garden, but what about hearing hate speech?
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot less, to me, concrete. It's more subtle. And I had an experience with someone I was in a situation where someone, a man in authority, really did something inappropriate with the young woman I was with.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just just stuck. Because if I said something at the time, I didn't know if that was something she wanted. It could have affected my job, could have affected her job. It could have been something that wasn't heard. I was just stuck. So, like, what about things that are not clear cut, concrete?
Yeah, so sometimes we're stuck, and sometimes it's really not clear. Like I said earlier, sometimes if you speak up about something, then that makes the person even more rigid and more likely to continue their behavior. So, your question is, where does wisdom come from? And you're right, we all bring karma to our activities. Everything we do is, in some sense, a result of our karma and adds to our karma, of course. And, it's. And how do we use our karma? How do we break through our karma so it doesn't hold us as a prisoner? And how do we have wisdom? That's your question. And you know what my answer is going to be. I would ask everyone to unmute yourself, and all together we can say, practice. Because when we practice and we see our minds do their little thing going round and round and round and round and round, it's not whack-a-mole, but we see, oh, that's my mind going round and round and round and round and round. And we see that it gets us nowhere. Because, it's really interesting. You sit on the cushion and you're obsessed by something that's really bothering you. Or maybe you're happily thinking about something that's really wonderful and you want to figure out how to do it again. Like, how did they make that chocolate cake that I had the other day? What recipe, whatever it is, you're planning and thinking and doing all this stuff. And then as soon as you get off the cushion, it's gone. Didn't do you any good at all to sit there on the cushion and think about, how am I going to talk to this person I can't stand? How am I going to, make that chocolate cake? Whatever it is, you whatever your mind was doing, it vanishes. It doesn't inform your life. What informs your life is to cut through that. To not, as the Diamond Sutra says and the Sixth Patriarch says, to not be attached to your thinking. To learn not to let it push you around. Then your wisdom can grow. Because your wisdom is not yours. It's not something you made up. Wisdom is something we all have. Innately, we have it, but it's just got all this other stuff, we can't even see it. So when we practice, just bring your mind back to practice. Bring your mind back to practice. Bring your mind back to practice. Just bring it back, bring it back, bring it back. And then your wisdom grows. Your wisdom grows and it grows and it grows. And your wisdom has no content. It's not an idea. It's not an opinion. It's not a sermon. It's not a sutra. Your wisdom is open. Your wisdom is open to the situation and free to act. That's your wisdom. And we have to grow it. And we have to allow it to blossom. And yeah, sometimes we will do something that we think is helpful and it turns out it's not. And then we have to have the wisdom to recognize that. Well, that didn't work, So yeah, like I said, being human is non-trivial. Zen Master Sungsan, he's always saying, a cat knows a cat's job, a dog knows a dog's job. Human beings do not know their job. And that's because we know too much. We have all these ideas on how things should be. And that's not how they are. So there we are, in this, like they say in the Diamond Sutras, a dream, a bubble. And we live in this bubble, we live in this dream. And just somehow cutting through that. That's why, in Zen, teachers often do, ha! Means wake up. Whatever you were thinking in that moment it was gone. So yeah, so that mind, that we call before thinking mind, don't know mind, that mind, let it blossom. So thank you for your question. And yeah, being human is hard. There's no question about it. Are there any other questions?